how many minutes is that? 14 minutes, explaining the binding rules provide the basis. Entire case. Well, the rules are more vague than the Constitution. The Deputy Prime Minister has done the value, not the Kita Constitution, actually. The Deputy Prime Minister has proposed an idea that when it is prone to ambiguous interpretations and the subjective values that these P5 states go for, it is innately harmful to the nations that are affected by the policies. And we proposed examples. I demand an engagement with the examples that we have proposed to you. Guatemala, when they enacted upon the first democratic election, the United States actually, under the notion of keeping that government under the scrutiny of their government, in a moment, man, under the idea, they nullified the election and went on to support the military control over this government. And this isn't a just war by any chance, and it was enacted by the two of the P5 states that we see, which is likely to be the actor when justifying the just war theory. Yes, ma'am?
Stop giving me irrelevant examples. Tell me how just war endorsed by UN has unique harm.
I think she got that from Seth, and yeah, I'll get onto that. Don't worry. This is merely an idea that I'm giving. Why binding rules provide the basis. Listen to me. And you concede it to the rules, and especially when it comes to security, it is controlled by certain states. And actually, Robert McNamara, who was actually the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Yugoslavia intervention amplified the casualties more than 3 times after he has retired. And what ended the war was due to the political sanctions that went on to the Yugoslavian crisis. And the Tiananmen protest actually, unrelated to the characterization of that side of the house, was remitted by the WTO's action to actually make China opt out of the GATS. And this was actually an idea that supported the ideas between this idea. And therefore, the binding rules doesn't do any good in the society. And secondly, onto the issue of will it remedy the situation in the long run? Well, they say that saving lives always comes first. This idea of sticking to the value of lives is always powerful for any opposition in any debate in any country, right? But funding Indonesia to invade East Timor, which was an example that actually was provided by the Deputy Prime Minister, and not intervening in the grave massacre of Rwanda, and instead allowing weapon industries to sell weapons to the Hutus and to the Tutsis is actually an example that proves that the principle behind the intervention wars and the principle behind the just wars to save lives is extremely inconsistent with the principle. And just because you draw the distinction by these states that have been engaged in these inconsistent principles, just by having those documented sets of rules that are vague and ambiguous in its nature, is not likely to lead to any betterment of the society in the long run. Therefore, it is unlikely that can win any argument. You are out of order. And allowing weapon and saving lives is merely a way to extract benefits. If you look at the past cases and this scenario, and the idea that UN is under the P5, and you have conceded to the idea, I demand an engagement to remedy for the premise that you have been taking for granted up to this point. And lastly, they say it is unrealistic for us to actually see the situation as opposing any war in any case. Well, why should the so-called peacekeeping entity, which arose after the World War I and arose changed into the United Nations, be the ones to initiate and justify the wars that are not even binded among the countries that are chosen, and the P5 unilaterally imposing upon this idea, which isn't even extremely codified or justified in order to unilaterally be under the influence. And the idea is simple, right? This is likely to pose a hindrance. The second speaker of our side actually made a contention, and which was not even engaged by the deputy leader of opposition. It will lead to an idea that war is justifiable, and the alternatives, rather than killing people, is not likely to be created under that model. And when that idea is set, it leads to more killing and leads to more bending the rules in the near future, especially when it is chosen by the most powerful military states in the world. Therefore, we are proud to oppose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 29 seconds.
anything is bad because P5 nations only pursue their own interests. And secondly, war under any case is bad. Therefore, just war theory is two bad things combined. Let's not endorse this. Now, if their identification of the cause of the problem is P5 nations having influence, we think that their own solution is contradicting itself. Why? Because they are endorsing economic sanction, which would be done by UN, which would be inevitably influenced by P5 nations. So, if your entire solution, better solution, it has the same cause of problem, what are you trying to prove here? Secondly, their entire problem has no solvency at all, as we've continuously pointed out, Mr. Speaker, because if their problem is certain countries having more power, not endorsing war, not endorsing just war, does not really change anything, because these countries would still have power anyways. That's why my second speaker came up to the podium and said that it's utmost cruciality that countries would be able to differentiate between the wars endorsed by UN and the wars not endorsed by UN. Why? Because under your model, every single war is equally bad. We think that there has to be certain differentiation where a country simply goes into countries for the hell of it or for oil, and when countries truly help, as a result, truly help certain countries from liberation from Libyan dictators. Now, having clarified this, let us see what happened in today's debate. Now, we think that three things happened in today's debate. First of all, comparison of the principles supported by two sides. Secondly, comparison of the models of the two sides. What would happen under our two different models? And third of all, outside benefits that would come from just war theory of benefits or the harms. Now, first of all, let us move right into comparison of the principles. Now, again, Mr. Speaker, we're completely baffled about what kind of principle they want to pursue. They, on one hand, told us that intervention itself is bad. On the other hand, told us that war is bad because it kills people. Now, again, opposition has clearly told from the beginning, Mr. Speaker, the world has a common value nowadays. That's exactly why we have UN. That's exactly why countries want to support UN, because countries see a certain binding power. Countries see a certain need and want to create a common community within the world. That's why we have international law, where there is no really enforcement power, but countries voluntarily follow international law because we see a common binding power. We think that just war theory endorsed by UN exactly symbolizes and signifies this. Why? Because it shows that in this world, countries pursue and follow a certain rules, follow a certain value. That's not only their own interest of the nations. That's why that's why UN endorses wars. In a moment. Yes, keep sending. That's why UN endorses a war that's not specifically to a country's own benefit, because we see a binding community existing here. Yes?
Can you say the vague criteria of those kinds of theories can be the criteria for making choices, killing millions of people?
Humanitarian intervention, UN peacekeeping troops. When UN sends peacekeeping troops, we think that's pretty clear. We think that when UN decides that, okay, let's go help South Korea, when North Korea is killing everybody there, let's go help Darfur, that's pretty much a clear thing going on. Now, second of all, let's see comparison of the models. Now, they told us that sanction is so much better. Sanction has these good qualities. Now, first of all, this is not mutually exclusive to you, because while we have just war theory endorsed by UN, we can also have sanctions. Okay? We're not here to disprove that sanctions are bad. We're here to prove that sometimes in certain cases, wars are necessary. No, I don't think wars are necessary. Why? Because my first two speakers told you, Mr. Speakers, that sometimes not every single dictator in the world is funded by oil. If you don't live in Middle East Asia, you don't have oil, you don't have power facilitated by some big firms. Whereas in countries like North Korea, these dictators oppress its people to keep their political powers. That's why, even without any money, these dictators still become really prosperous and successful because they have political power over its people. They actually kill its people, send them to concentration camps. So what do we have as a solution? We send troops so that in actual action we help Libyans. In actual action we help Darfur. We think that in certain cases, war is necessary because this is the most direct way. And secondly, in certain cases, when people are imminently dying, the only fast way to actually help these people is to help these people is to send troops. Now, tell us how sending troops in these cases do not have any conclusions. We think that your entire analogy about how principle is bad, how the cause is not good, doesn't really stand when we have an actual result of people living because of just war, because of troops in Libya, because of troops, UN peacekeeping troops in Darfur. Tell us how that's bad, and then you win the debate, okay? Third of all, no. Let us move into the benefits. Now, they told us that, okay, the harms of just war is that these people go into countries and kill people. If you want to support human rights, you shouldn't kill human, so, it's contradictory. Now, I see a lot of, contradictory arguments from CUDS. Now, tell us why killing Kim Jong-un, because he kills 5 million people, is bad, how that's against human rights. We think that simply in certain cases, there are outer benefits, there are inevitable benefits that come from taking out the people. And secondly, my two first speakers told us that anarchic state itself is bad. Why? Because these countries simply abuse their power without UN endorsing a rule, without UN endorsing this legitimacy of this war is good, this war is bad. We think that that has to be strengthened. Now their entire argument was about how that's not good enough, how that's not strong enough. If that's not strong enough, about how your own argument about how, okay, if we send troops because of mass destruction of weapons, then these countries have already developed, then send troops earlier. That's how you stop the war. We think that their entire argument was about how it's not good enough. If that's not good enough, we think that just war theory should be supported. Just war theory should be endorsed, not really taken out, because you haven't given me any of the arguments that uniquely rebuts the benefits of the just war theory. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, we trust you in your judgment of reading a debate on how both sides had a spirit of the motion, how both sides endorsed a clear principle and benefits. So on that note, we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Speakers spoke for 7 minutes and 22 seconds. Opposition reply.
Thank you again, Mr. Speakers and ladies and gentlemen. Now it all comes back to this again. What are they trying to propose at the end of the day? You see, the thing here is, they try to pursue, an alternative that try to match ours. Economics and sanctions. But the thing is, we have disproved them ever since the very beginning. We have proven to you that the problems they analyze actually are the problems that are more influential within their policy, which is a very big contradiction for a government to be setting a case on from the very beginning. So, ever since the debate started, their case was very shaky. And even under the premise that we started these economic sanctions, our entire speeches have clearly proven to you that it is under the assumption that dictators are fueled by economic fuel. But the thing is, we prove to you that is overgeneralizing, and most of the cases are not actually like that. And also, their one big flaw was it's not mutually exclusive to our situation. Our speakers have proven to you that there are situations where economic sanctions actually do work and solve the situation. Great, but the thing is, there are situations where are dire enough to call for desperate needs that actually bring upon, that needs to bring upon a solvency. In that situation, it was when things have a necessity to get harder to secure the concrete moral standards we have right now. Not the vague things of governmental standards, because that is the thing that is entitled to countries, but the concrete standards that I have told you on my first speech. Human rights, justice, and basic things that we all agree on as pursuable things. Those are the categories that we have been telling you ever since the beginning of our speeches. So basically, let's go on to this debate, first of all, what happened throughout. So the thing is, the governmental stance was very, very defensive in the fact that they were trying to disprove our case by proving it's not efficient, it's not going to work. But they have never actually brought upon to you the harms, and they were never actually able to rebut the principle itself. So the thing is, the idea is good, but it's not. But we have disproved the problems of inefficiency. So basically our case still stands. So all their rebuttals, all their arguments still false. But the thing that's supposed to be there, their policy has been shattered from the very beginning. So the thing we have left here is an opposition that is actually trying to work for a world that has a better consensus regarding the UN, which is trying to pursue world peace and actually does receive support from the international community. Voluntary support, because they concede to the fact that they need coexistence because they learned it the hard way. The thing lies here. We have tried to pursue principle and we are trying to pursue benefits on showing that how wars that are being abused, how the UN needs to have a certain category so they can label some wars as bad wars that are being prone to abuse, and some wars that are good wars that needed to be used in dire situations to secure the moral standards that the UN has been proposing in the very first place. So we have cleared the case to you right now. We have proved to you how the UN is the organization that should be embracing this, how it is principally right that it should embrace it, how the UN will be largely beneficial by embracing this, and how our case still stands. So all in all, the opposition team has proven to you a stance where there are calculable benefits, and there are calculable benefits and a better social consensus. In short, the government, they have tried to negate our case, but they have never been able to prove a cost-benefit analysis, and they have a benefit analysis, but they have never been able to prove any concrete harms in this very aspect so far. Because they have under the assumption that all wars are bad, but we have been clearly proving to you that certain situations require wars in order to secure moral standards. So, because we have the moral high ground, because of the principle high ground, and the basic entire policy high ground, and in this debate, and more constructive matter that has been left throughout, it is clear that the opposition actually does take this debate home. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 3 minutes and 48 seconds. I'd like to introduce the last speaker of this debate.
The war must be for a just cause. The intention behind the war must be good. The means used must be in proportion to the end that the war seeks to achieve. These are some of the clauses that are included in the just war theory and the conditions of when that just war theory is actually justified. Our first contention on side affirmative was the idea that these standards within themselves are vague as the key to Constitution within itself. We believe that because the key to Constitution was not as specific as it should have been, that is the moment where it was actually prone to interpretation. It was actually prone to abuse. We believe that that is the harm that comes from the idea of the just war theory, and that is the moment where we say that the United Nations should not support the just war theory and should not support wars overall. I have 3 issues in this overall debate. First of all is the criteria of the just war. Second is regarding abuse, and third is regarding alternatives. First, I'm regarding the criteria of the just war. They come up here and say that we have to have a binding force and we have to have binding power on to decide whether this war is just and whether that war is just. First of all, if the criteria of that decision within itself is vague within itself, then we believe that that decision is also problematic, and that decision should also be questionable. They never rebutted against the idea in saying that when the United Nations actually ratified the just war against Chile, when we were actually trying to take out that specific president, they never actually analyzed about why that was actually why that was actually beneficial for the people who actually died during that specific intervention. They just came up and said that, oh, it's because intervention, oh, it's actually good for the people. No, they never engaged upon that idea. So therefore, we actually believe that it actually goes into the second idea of abuse. Because of the fundamental reason about why it is actually prone to intervention, just by saying that the intention behind a war must be good. Obviously, every single intervention in this entire world is actually good, but the outcome of the results are what is at stake. We believe that the outcomes of proportionality, when we actually go into a specific area, when we destroy its entire economy, when we destroy its infrastructure, is not actually, it could have good intention, but inevitably it does not have a good success case. We've clearly given you the idea behind our first speaker about proportionality, about how there's a lot of harms within the form of war within itself. We believe that based upon that idea, people don't go into Rwanda, people don't intervene in Syria, but they actually intervene in Chile, they intervene in Guatemala, based upon the ideas and the abuse that is created by the P5 nations, which we thought was problematic. Their only engagement upon that idea was the idea that, oh, our other alternative was actually based upon the P5 nations as well. We've already rebutted to, and the DLO never engaged upon that idea, is that the reason why Russia supports the reason why Russia does not support intervention, but actually supports economic sanctions, is because there's far less tangible harms that directly go to their their own country. They never engaged upon that point, which is the direct incentive, and the reason why economic sanctions is far more better is because there are tangible, less harms to the overall country, but it is because of an international consensus, which is the reason why Russia actually supports it. They never engaged upon that point, and therefore our alternative still stands. Secondly, when we look at their entire case, they talk about the characteristics of the United Nations. They talk about the benefits and talking about how human rights are actually helped. And second of all, how we can differentiate wars within themselves. I've already engaged you upon the idea about when we actually differentiate wars based upon intention, we don't necessarily come out with the best outcomes that the United Nations wants to. Because our principle behind the United Nations was actually very clear. We wanted to mediate the kind of ideas. We wanted to mediate the kind of conflicts instead of just going unilaterally and actually start killing people. That was the moment where their proportionality actually goes away and gets blown away, because the human rights that you are supposed to protect is actually not protected under the clauses and under the Constitution of the United Nations. We believe that their entire case flaws based upon, because first of all, they never proved to us why that criteria was actually just to begin with. But even if that criteria was just to begin with, we don't necessarily believe that the outcomes are actually justified to begin with. And third of all, we've already told you that there was another alternative that we could use in this status quo, and why it is still justified, and why is it the most effective means that we can use, except for the idea of war. We believe that we should also debate in the same way, and we believe that the United Nations should actually fail in that conclusion.
Alright, thank you for the speech. I'd like the teams to cross the floor, shake hands.